Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Elena, and I am streaming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific today. I'm so excited for us to get started. I have Talia who's helping me in the back today. So if you see any of our media changing, that's all thanks to Talia. So we are going to get started with our class all about invertebrates today. But before we get started, we just wanted to have offer you, if you had any questions, any live questions with our chat today, to please text the number 562-286-1838. And we're going to go ahead and put that number on the screen for you. If you have any questions after this stream or at a different day or time, you are more than welcome to email us at live@lbaop.org. So we've got both of those listed down here for you. So you're more than welcome to use the live chat. Please feel free to text us if you're watching this live with us this morning. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we are talking all about invertebrates. Now, this word maybe you've heard of before, maybe you haven't heard of this word before, but before we get into what an invertebrate really is, I'm going to have us watch this really cool webcam that we have behind me right now. This is our live jellies exhibit, so this is happening right now in real time at the Aquarium of the Pacific. If you were to come into our gallery, this is what you would see. So we're going to go ahead and just watch this for a few minutes. These are in fact sea jellies, and so some things that I want you to start thinking are maybe, what do you notice about some of these animals? What observations can you make about these jellies? Now, observations can be anything that you see, hear, taste, smell, basically anything that you use your five senses for. So in this case, we're going to be watching this jelly cam, and I want you to start making some observations. What do you notice? Maybe what do you notice about how they're moving? If they're moving really slow, if they're moving really fast. Are they all moving at the same time? Are they all moving at different times? And if you've got someone next to you watching this live, you can also talk to them about what observations that you're noticing and seeing. Yeah, so I can share some of the things that I was noticing already is that not all of them are moving at the same time or at the same speed. They're all kind of, it looks like they're almost just drifting or flowing with the water. And so they're very, very peaceful to look at. I love watching them, even at my time here, whenever I get a chance to, because they're so peaceful and graceful. But I love all the observations that you were able to make and maybe share with the person next to you. So another question that I wanted to ask was maybe how are these animals a little bit different than you and I as people, as humans? That was kind of another thing that I wanted you to think about. Maybe we can take another second. What do you notice that's different? It can be how they move. It can be what shape they are. It can be maybe what they're made of that makes jellies so different from us as people. So we're going to now go ahead and talk about what that word invertebrate means. Because in order to talk about the differences between these jellies and you and I, is that we have to go over what a vertebrate and an invertebrate are. So a vertebrate just means that the animal or organism has a backbone or spine or a skeleton. So you and I, as people, we have a skeleton. It's really, really hard and bony. If you feel your hands, you can feel the bones in your hand. If you take your hand and feel your back, you can kind of feel the backbone that you have and all the little vertebrae that make up your spine. So we need these bones in order to keep our bodies upright and fighting gravity every single day. It's kind of hard living on land. Now, invertebrate kind of sounds like that first word vertebrate, right? Except the word in means without. So if you're an invertebrate, go ahead and talk to your neighbor for a second. Do you think that means that they have bone or they don't have bone? You're right. That means that they don't have a bone. So in their bodies are just shaped a little bit different and structured a little bit differently. And that's because a lot of invertebrates have to live in water, at least the ones that we're going to be talking about today. And living in a water environment or an aquatic environment has some different challenges than if you were to live on land, right? Like we as people can walk around, we can hike up a mountain, maybe we can swim in the ocean or in a pool. But if you were to live in water all day, every day, you'd need some different tools in your toolkit to help you kind of survive in that. And we're going to call those tools adaptations. So adaptations is going to be another big topic that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to get to go over how some animals have maybe similar adaptations to each other or different adaptations to each other. So with that, we're going to go ahead and talk about our first animal of today, which is going to be our friend, the octopus. So we're going to go ahead and pull up an octopus here for you to see. Oh, here's our giant Pacific octopus. Super cool. Now, what I want you to do, again, I want you to make those observations. I want you to think about, how does this octopus look? What makes this octopus different from you and I? What do you notice about its skin or something on its body that maybe you've seen before, maybe you even know the name of? Go ahead and take a minute or two to make those observations. And again, if you're with people, make sure you share those observations with each other. Maybe you're talking about the same things. Maybe you're talking about different things. So definitely take a minute or two to go over what you notice or what you observe. Awesome job. So some of the things that I notice on this octopus is that the octopus has a lot of these, kind of the first thing that stands out to you is all of these suction cups, right? Do you see all those little spots on the undersides of its arms? Each arm has suction cups that essentially help the octopus move. Now, in the water, have you ever tried like swimming in the water? And sometimes people can swim really, really fast, and sometimes people can swim really, really slow. So the suction cups for the octopus help them move really, really fast and not drift away or drift off of a surface. Almost think of like a toilet plunger. If you've ever seen a plunger before in the bathroom and you kind of stick it to something, it's kind of hard to get off. So that's the idea behind the suction cups here, is that those help the octopus anchor down to a spot, but also they can control all of those suction cups and they can move around really easily and they can climb on all sorts of different things. You can take another second to make maybe another observation. Okay. And remember, if you want to text us any of your questions, since we're doing this live, you can text that number again, 562-286-1838. So awesome job. Yeah, I also noticed that the octopus has a couple eyes, right? It's got two eyes on its head, kind of like you and I. And they use those eyes to see their environment. Now, if you notice on the side here, they're shaped just a little bit differently than yours and mine. And that's just because they have to see in water. They have to see in an aquatic environment. So their eyeballs are going to be a little bit different than yours and mine because they have to deal with the light looking different underwater, things looking different underwater, and definitely making sure that their surroundings are safe enough for them to climb around in. Another thing that we probably noticed is all of those arms. They have a lot of arms. They've actually got 8 of them. That's kind of in their name, octopus. Now, all 8 of those arms basically help them move around, kind of like we were talking about with the suction cups. So instead of having 2 arms and 2 legs, like we do as people, the octopus have 8 arms to help them move around. And I know we got some sending their observations and even questions. Thanks so much for helping with that. So Carson said that they're moving backwards. Oh yeah, the jellies. The jellies moved backwards. We can go back to that webcam for a second if we want to see how the jellies were moving backwards. Sometimes I wish I could move backwards that easily, but it's kind of, they're just doing it and they're not even thinking twice about it. It's kind of graceful. And it looks like Arson and Lennon said that we have spines. Yes, we as people have spines. We have a backbone. And Matthew and Connor mentioned that as well. I love that you were already making those observations. And a couple questions that I see here from Emmett. How do these jellies glow? So the way that jellies glow sometimes is that they have these special cells in their body. They have these special things in their body that they can control color. So what we call those is chromatophores. And so they use chromatophores to change the color depending on their environment. So depending on the animal, they might want to look darker. Depending on the animal, they might want to look lighter. We'll actually notice this in a second with our octopus friend because a lot of different animals have these cells called chromatophores, but that's essentially how they glow and how they're able to kind of use that as protection. For our moon jellies here at the aquarium, sometimes you might notice that their insides glow a little bit, but that's just because of the food that they're eating. So we feed them a brine shrimp that's already kind of like a pinkish or orange color. So you can see how their food travels throughout their body and into their stomachs. And sometimes that gives off a neon appearance as well. So if you've been here at the aquarium before, maybe you've seen that. Dylan had a question about how many babies can an octopus have at one time. So this is actually a really great question. Talia, do you know how many babies an octopus can have at a single time? I believe it's a lot. We're going to get a specific answer for you, Dylan, in just a second. But for now, I'm going to move on to our next question that Jackson had, which is tentacles. They have, the tentacles or the arms on an octopus, in this case, are kind of like a reddish color. But again, depending on the type of octopus that you are, your skin might look a little bit differently. So because giant Pacific octopuses live here in the Pacific Ocean, our water is a little bit darker and more murky, very nutrient rich, whereas a tropical octopus might be a little bit lighter in color because it's got the lighter sand, it's got more sun. So really, again, just depends on where the octopus lives. So we just got a report, Dylan, on how many babies can an octopus have at a time. They can lay, I think it was 20,000 to 80,000 eggs at a time, which is a lot of eggs. That's a lot. But again, remember, sometimes the eggs some of them will survive, some of them won't. So it's really just a game of chance and seeing which ones can survive or not, which is why they lay so many of them. And actually, a lot of animals in nature will do this as well. So we're going to go back to our octopus friend for just a second, and we're going to see maybe how those chromatophores work on an octopus. And that is a form, again, of adaptation, a toolkit on their body that they do in order to protect themselves and hide. So you can see here we've got an octopus. Make some observations about what you notice. We're going to watch this maybe one or two more times. I want you to talk to your neighbor about what's happening to the color of the octopus, what's happening to the skin. There's a lot of things happening here. So definitely talk to your neighbor or think in your head, what kinds of things do you see happening to this octopus's skin? Yeah, so you can absolutely see how their skin color changes, right? It's blending in to the coral reef that it's kind of perched on. This is called camouflage. Maybe you've heard of that word before, but camouflage is just how animals hide sometimes in their environment in order to protect themselves. So not only is our octopus friend here changing color, but it's also changing the texture of its skin, which I think is really, really cool because you can see how it kind of gets a little spiky, a little pokey, just like the coral that it's sitting on. So when you see the different colors changing on that octopus's skin, those are the chromatophores that we were talking about not too long ago. So those are cells in their body that they can change whenever they want. They can lighten them and darken them in order to kind of do this really cool thing, which I think is really awesome. We have another question from Leo. How come inverts don't become a pile of mush without bones? And that's a really good question. So for some animals, they have a really tough exterior. They have a really tough layer of skin or covering on the outside of their body that helps them hold their shape. So we can transition to our sea star if you'd like to see that. We can see how a sea star has really, really thick skin on the outside of its body that protects all of the stuff on the inside. So you can see here that we have some of our bat stars, and you can see that they're not a pile of mush, right? They have a distinct shape. A lot of people will call them a starfish, but the funny thing about starfish is that they're not actually fish. They are invertebrates. They don't have any bones. A lot of fish do have bones, so that's why we tend to say sea stars and not so much starfish. So you can see here that the sea stars are holding their shape really well, and that's because, again, they've got the really thick skin covering their bodies in order to keep their insides protected. They've got a mouth underneath their body, so if you have the sea star that's kind of got its top here, underneath is where their mouth is, and then they've got 5 arms. Sometimes they have more arms. Just depends on the type of sea star. Connor asked, can octopus control their suction cups? They can, and actually they can control each arm individually because they have a brain on each arm, which is kind of cool when you think about it. Like, imagine if you had a brain for each of your arms and your legs. That'd be kind of cool. So they have to have a brain for each arm because they have to be able to control independently. They have to control one by one each arm in order to move. So they can control their arms, and their arms can absolutely control those suction cups. Otherwise, if they couldn't, I think they'd get stuck in a lot of places. Violet asks, how many suction cups does an octopus have? Violet, that's an excellent question. They can have 2,240 suction cups on their body, which is kind of a lot, right? If we go back to our picture of the octopus, you could try to sit here and count all 2,240 of those suction cups, but there's some that we can't even see because they're covered on the other side of the picture. But you can see here, they've lots of the suction cups kind of bigger towards the middle, and then towards the very end or the tip of their arms, you can notice how those suction cups get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they're tiny all the way on the ends of their arms. Athena asked, what does an octopus eat? Athena and Lily actually asked this question. So octopus love to eat things like small fish. Sometimes they'll eat things like clams or mussels. They actually have a really cool beak on the underside of their body, and we can kind of see the underside here. You can see how our octopus is moving. But they usually will eat stuff with really hard shells. Sometimes they'll eat softer things like those fish, but they have a really strong beak, almost like a bird's beak, in order to help them break through some really, really hard shells. Because I don't know if you've stepped on a shell or tried to open a shell before, but they're really tough to open. They'll also use those suction cups to kind of pry something open. So almost like if you've opened a jar of jam or pickles, it's really hard to take those caps off sometimes, right? So what an octopus will do is they'll use those suction cups to pry open or open up with a lot of strength those different clam shells, mussel shells, anything that has a really tough shell. So they're really, really creative in that way, and they use all those different tools, adaptations on their bodies, which is really cool. And Joey asked, how do octopus protect themselves? Well, Joey, we got to see one of the ways that an octopus protects itself, and that was through camouflage, right? That's kind of the best way, is to kind of just attach to something and hide. Now, another way that an octopus can actually protect itself is that it can release ink, which maybe you already knew. I know that's kind of a common fact about an octopus, but maybe you're hearing that for the first time. So if you see the side, the little side piece that's on the octopus right now, it's kind of inflating with water and deflating with expelling water, but it's got that little tube on the side of its head. We're going to see it again in just a second. Oh, we've got one right there. You can see that tube that's opening up and closing, and it's kind of moving from side to side, and that is what the ink comes out of, which is kind of cool. You saw that the octopus inked right there. We'll go ahead and take a look at it again so you can see, but that is called a siphon. So that's basically what helps the octopus eject the ink, but also what they use the siphon for is they will, almost like a straw, suck in a bunch of water and then shoot the water out really, really fast to help them move through the water even faster. So if they wanted to swim away from their predators, they absolutely could. If they wanted to stay in a place and confuse their predator or distract their predator, they could use that ink in order to kind of spook their predator. And if they wanted to stay in place and just kind of hide and hope for the predator to just swim away, they can use those chromatophores, those skin changing cells, to hide in place, which I think is kind of cool. So we can go ahead and move on to our abalone. Our abalone is a type of sea snail that lives out in the ocean that also has a really cool thing on its body that helps protect itself. It's another form of adaptation. So we're going to look at this abalone really quick. We've actually got quite a few of them in this picture, but I want you to start thinking about, what do you notice about this type of invertebrate? What do you notice about this abalone? You can maybe make mention of how it looks, maybe what you notice on top of its body, on the side of its body. What do you think looks the same or different as our octopus friend, or maybe you and I? Because again, we're talking about what a vertebrate looks like versus an invertebrate, maybe what people look like versus these types of animals. So go ahead and make those observations, talk to your neighbor, and I'll give you about a minute or so to do that. And again, if you had any questions, please feel free to text our number. And again, that number is 562-286-1838 for your live questions.
Thomas says it looks like an animal built out of shells.
Ooh, Thomas says it looks like an animal built out of shells. Well, Thomas, you're right. This animal does have a shell. It's got a shell on the top of its body that you can kind of see there. Excellent observation. Yes, we can actually talk about that shell for just a second. So, shells are really, really important to a lot of animals. Now, think about animals that have shells in the ocean. Just think about them for a second. Maybe like a crab, or maybe other type of sea snail. What other animals have shells? Lots of other animals have shells. But think about some of those animals that have shells and think about if they move really, really fast or really, really slow. A lot of the times, animals that have shells move really, really slow. Think about a snail even on land, in a garden or outside that maybe you've seen. Do those move really, really fast or really slow? They move pretty slow. It's at like a snail's pace. So snails and a lot of other types of invertebrates will have shells that kind of act like armor on their body. So it's almost like if you've ever seen a knight with armor, kind of like that huge outer shell that protects their body inside. That's exactly what these animals have, which is kind of cool because it's like if you have a little shield with you at all times. So this helps the animal prevent being stepped on. Maybe an animal's trying to walk over it and it doesn't want to get squished. So the shells absolutely help with the animal to not be squished. But also, if you have an animal that's trying to eat you, it's kind of helpful to have that really, really hard shell. So that makes it harder for the predator to eat you, harder for the other animal to kind of get access to you. So shells are really, really awesome. Also, it's kind of like a form of camouflage. It basically helps them blend in to their surroundings. If you look at this picture again, if you were looking really, really fast at this picture, you might not even think twice that there's an animal living in that shell. It might look like a smaller rock on top of a bigger rock, right? So shells are really, really versatile. They're really, really awesome for a lot of animals. And they're also beautiful to look at and to feel. Some shells will feel different than others. I know our abalone in our picture here have these kind of more rough looking shells. They've got lots of ridges and lots of bumps, but there are some snails out there in the wild, kind of like chestnut cowries, that have a really, really smooth type of shell. And that's because they do a really good job cleaning their shells every day. You can see that here. Do you see how there are those polka dots kind of on the sides of their body? That is a really thin filament that basically covers their entire shell, and that's what cleans off their shell. So for the cowries like this one, they really like having a smooth and clean shell. And these animals are incredibly difficult to find still, even though they're really, really clean and shiny like that. They don't have as many bumps as the abalone. They're still really, really hard to find out in their natural habitat. So, with that, we wanted to share with you a really cool conservation program that we as the Aquarium of the Pacific are part of, and that is our abalone conservation project. So, abalone were hunted out in the wild for a really long time, and so their numbers started to go down. There started to not be as many of them out in their natural habitats. And it's specifically the white abalone that we are doing this project with. So, what we are doing as an aquarium is we are basically having our abalone, and we are taking care of baby abalone, and we're raising them so that they can get nice and big, and then we take them back out into their habitats, and we basically replenish the numbers that we're missing in the wild. So we're helping out the abalone in that way. Abalone take a really, really, really long time to get their full size out in nature, which is so hard for them to grow back after being hunted for so long. It took a really long time for them to to old enough age that they were able to live on their own and reproduce on their own. So that's why it was so hard for their population to come back. But we as an aquarium and a lot of other aquariums have abalone conservation projects as well. But we specifically deal with the white abalone, and we're just making sure that their population stays nice and healthy because these animals are really, really important to our environment. They have a really big job to do. They eat things like algae and things of sort that basically were left, if algae was left unattended and just kind of grew forever and ever, it would affect other animals and other things in a negative way. So that's why abalone are so important. They help the food chain, and a lot of animals use them as a food source. Some animals like use them as a abalone are really, really important. We have our conservation project on them, and if you visit us at the aquarium, different areas of our aquarium, and they're really, really cool to look at. And also, if you've ever seen an abalone shell, the shells are beautiful on the inside and out.
We had a question about how do abalone camouflage, and I think something about what are the shells for?
Yeah, so good questions. The first question that I'll go over is how do abalone camouflage? Now, the way that abalone camouflage is a little different than the octopus, right? We saw how the octopus had the skin on its body changing color. You don't really see that. They don't really do. So what abalone do is they have a shell on their body that you can kind of see right here. They've got the really, really big shell. And since they're slow moving, a lot of other things will start to grow on top of it, kind of like algae or other types of animals will start to live on the shell of the abalone. So having all of those different things on top help the abalone blend in to its surroundings a little bit better. So you can kind of see here in this picture how abalone kind of looks a little dirty, maybe a little darker in color, a little lighter in some other parts of its body. And so it almost looks just like a rock. And so when I say camouflage, that's what I mean, is that it just looks really similar to the rock or the sand. That's the type of camouflage that I'm talking about here. I had another friend ask a question of why do these abalones have shells? And they have shells because on the inside of an abalone, they're just like a snail. They're really, really squishy. They kind of look like a blob. You can kind of see on the lower picture of the abalone, where the text live questions are. It's got the little parts of it sticking out. That's the squishy part of the abalone. So the abalone has the hard shell on its body, basically to protect all of those squishy parts of its body, the softer parts of its body. So again, in case it gets stepped on or in case an animal wants to try it, that's what it'll use the shell for. Now, as we end our time here together, I just want to thank you so much for spending your morning with us, watching our show on invertebrates, our talk on invertebrates. You all asked such fantastic questions, and you're all going to be professional scientists in the future, I can already tell. Again, if you wanted to ask any other questions, after our program, please email us at live@lbaop.org if you're watching this at a later time. And if I have any teachers who are watching this program, if you could text us at that number, 562-286-1838, if you could text us your class number for today, that would be absolutely awesome. Thank you so much again, everyone, for your time. I hope you got to learn a little bit more about what makes a vertebrate, what makes an invertebrate, and how we got to even talk about some of those invertebrates today. Thank you so much again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.